Welcome to the College of Creation. My name is Dan.
And my name is Michael.
And we are Dungeons & Dragons DMs who love to homebrew items, spells, rules, creatures, and features for D&D. And this is a show where we challenge each other and ourselves to make new homebrew every single week based on prompts from our wonderful community and various friends in the TTRPG space. Michael, how are you doing this week?
I'm doing fantastically this week.
Good.
Not super sold on the thing that I made, but I am in good spirits nonetheless.
That does happen.
Yeah.
Michael, I know we talked a little bit about this prompt last week, but to remind our listeners, this week we were challenged to build an item that gives you a benefit now, but some sort of penalty applied by the DM at some point in the future. And we had a little bit of things to say about just like, you know, obviously things like this can be a little tricky when they're just built like the way that we build things, which is really table agnostic. You know, we're not building this for a specific player. We're not building this for a specific game or with a group that we've had a proper session zero and everything with, you know?
Yeah.
And so we discussed how important it is to make sure that session zero establishes how comfortable people are with this kind of idea. But I wonder in the intervening days if you've had any additional thoughts about that whole topic in general.
So this has really dictated how I've thought about this topic all week. It 100% was the factor that shaped what I made. I found it hard to bring myself to make an actual item, so I kind of created a framework for items instead. I think that it really just I would feel very strange if I made something that somebody somewhere out in the nexus of the internet took and used in an antagonistic way towards their players, or vice versa. You know, DMs are players as well. You know, these are all things that we're making in, you know, sometimes 5 or 4 days, and they're not balanced, they're not play tested, so, you know, we'll put them out onto the internet, and that's not the type of thing that I want somebody with that Gygaxian mindset to get a hold of.
Sure.
So yeah, it really was the baseline for everything that I did this week. I don't know if that was to my benefit or to my detriment. You can be the decider on that in a few moments. It's always very dicey, right? When you put too much power into the hands of the dungeon master, it can get very strange. It murks up the waters really quickly. So an arbitrary consequence, I felt, was just a little bit too far past the line that an item should just have as a thing. As a mechanic.
I think that's really reasonable, and I do think you're hitting the nail on the head as far as how I think about these things too. You know, the DM already, you know, if you really wanted to, you can take all the power. You know, you have it. Yeah. You create and control so much of the reality that, like, what I'm doing so much of the time is within the boundaries that I've established with my players, is I am giving them the opportunity to do whatever they want, but with the understanding that those things will come with consequences or penalties later, right? Like, you can ignore this situation, but and that might be to your benefit, but there might be consequences later. So this prompt does sort of like speak to what I think is just the nature of how the DM interacts with reality in the game.
Yes.
And so I think to put it in a codified sort of mechanical sense does maybe put too fine a point on it. So what I ended up doing was I presented a thing that the player can have a ton of agency in. The things that I
overloaded
created
on the front end. Yeah.
Well, the things that I created are more just like presenting the player with a choice where they do know what the penalty is going to be later, right? And so they can make an educated decision, and so that the DM isn't like surprising you later with like something that's like, this is gonna screw you.
Yes.
Like, you know what the stakes are going in. and you can make the choice to do this or to not.
Yeah. Well, and that's the key, right? Is communication as a foundational moment in the game, whether that's during session 0 or when you introduce these items, or when they're, you could even make it setting based. They go into a shop and everything there looks questionable. These items might be cursed.
Yeah, setting
or
some
have
sorts of
adverse
boundaries.
effects. Exactly. Some type of explanation to let the players know that something is coming, and it's not just what I, as a game master, deems reasonable as a response when that consequence comes. Sometimes, and I've definitely fallen into this trap myself, that DMs, especially newer DMs, think that withholding any type of game mechanic can lead to a bigger reveal, or a more climactic moment, a more emphatic moment, either narratively or mechanically in the game. And that, in my experience now, is just not the case. Sometimes you get lucky, and it is. Sometimes it can be very cool if there's a secret that a player is keeping for their character, and they reveal it, leave breadcrumbs or whatever they want to do. Sometimes it can really work out, but most of the time, the more information your players have and the more trust that you as a DM can put into your players to experience that all together, the better the result will be for the table as a whole.
I think it's fair to say we can wrap up this conversation just to say that, like, establish these things with your table when you're setting up your game. Like, how much risk reward are they
important.
into? How much are they into the idea of, like, you know responding with harsh penalties to actions they take, and things like that. That is very much a table by table thing, and it's really important to have that discussion about how you want to play the game.
However you as a player or you as a DM want to do that too. For me, when I have new players, or I'm playing in new settings, or starting a new game in any sense, I like to start with mini, like, one-on-one sessions with my players. And I don't start with a session 0 right away. Sometimes I will, but I like to just be super vanilla on my end and just let player characters experience the world and react and take actions, and I just collect information. So whatever they feel, whatever I feel like they're gravitating towards, is what I'll try and lean into. And if they lean into it with me, great. That's the direction that we're going to take that character. And then once we do get to a session 0, we can start shaping the game around that. But a lot of people also like to just from the jump go into table rules, go into table care. That is also a totally valid and useful way to start things out as well. And also a way that I have conducted things before too.
Well, yeah, and I think that you mentioned, especially with new players, I think that's huge because a lot of new players don't know what they're going to like, what they want the game to be. So if you try and ask them, like, do you want a real, like, harsh, gritty game? They might say, like, I don't know, I'm kind of down for anything, but, like, they don't know what they want.
They don't know
yet,
that
because they haven't experienced any of it. So I like that idea of, like, that one-on-one to sort of settle them into, like, how this works, and then get to the point where then they're starting to get more of a sense of what is interesting and fun for them, before just being asked the question, which makes a ton of sense to me. And I also think it's worth saying, like, all of those things, your table rules, and of course the boundaries content-wise are important to talk about at session 0 or prior. But these gameplay questions of, like, what sort of story do we want to tell together, are just as, if not more important, than some of those things, because
Agreed.
a lot of people
'Cause that
skip
can
that. A
inform
lot
a
of
lot of
people,
that stuff.
yeah,
Yeah.
a lot of people
Yeah.
skip the like, how do we want to talk about or how do we want to play this game, and it just doesn't, it doesn't come up
Yeah.
until they're in the middle of it and the player realizes, oh, I really wish that there was more exploration going on here. I'm not having a lot of fun in the combat because I didn't build a character that was spec'd for combat, and this is like an 80% combat game. So yeah, I think these conversations about gameplay and about the kind of tone we want to set with mechanics is so important.
Really, the more conversation you can have with your players up to their threshold, the better. I
Yeah.
think there is a limit where players are like, okay,
Yeah, I'm
let's
ready to
just
go.
start the game.
Yeah, exactly.
Come on.
Ready to go.
So there is that threshold that can be reached, but up until that point, the more information that the players and the game master can move between each other, the better the experience for everybody. And
Absolutely.
that, in turn, will make items like these more accessible and more usable in your games. Shall
to
we
that
just get
end,
into it?
do you want to? Yeah, I was going to say, do you want to
Yeah.
see the things that I made? Because I came with two distinct items.
Let's go.
Okay, if you want to open up your document, I have here two items. They are the weapon of binding, can be any weapon, and the scales of Vergadin.
Ooh, an artifact. Wow.
Indeed, an artifact. The prompt specifically mentioned a benefit now at the cost of a penalty later. I did one in that order and another in the opposite order. So we'll go through the first one first. This is the one that was straight inspired by the prompt for a benefit now, for a penalty later, or a potential penalty later. This is called the Weapon of Binding. I don't have it designated here, but it can be any weapon. If you want to make this a warhammer, if you want to make this a short sword, whatever. This weapon is decorated with simple colorless stones. When you reduce a creature with a CR of half your character level or lower, rounded down, to 0 HP with this weapon, you can use your reaction to capture that creature's essence, sealing it within the weapon. While you have a creature's essence captured, you can use your action to invoke the essence and take a single action from the creature's listed actions using its abilities and statistics. This feature can be invoked a number of times equal to the captured creature's proficiency bonus and regains all expended uses at dawn each day. This is somewhat inspired by I know we've talked about it before, but the hunter archetype in Octopath Traveler can kind of grab some monsters and then utilize them in battle. So this is sort of doing that through a weapon. You don't get like the full summoned monster or anything, but through your weapon, you can channel that monster's energy and take one of its actions. Obviously, if you're just getting like bear, it's going to be a claw attack or whatever, and it's just going to be a nice heavy hammer blow or whatever it is. But there are all kinds of monsters with all kinds of other abilities that you could invoke with this.
I'm thinking like a Shadow's Strength Drain would be great.
Yeah. So like a Shadow's Strength Drain is a great option for that, because you could, do a little bit of straight damage, but also reduce that ability score a little bit.
Yeah.
Now, you can't do that all the time because a Shadow is a low CR creature that I think only has a proficiency bonus of 2.
Yeah, I was going to say, you only get it once or twice, but that might be all you need.
It might be all you need. So it's a
drain.
fun little thing. It's a fun little thing. But here is the potential penalty later, right? So this feature lasts until your attunement ends or until you use your reaction to capture a new creature. So you can only have one at a time. Either option causes the previously trapped essence to be released. The essence holds a grudge against you and may possess another creature, granting it special resistances, immunities, abilities, or actions in a future encounter according to its type and CR at your DM's discretion.
This is the perfect response to this prompt. This is so good.
I thought it was really fun. Your DM can basically just give a creature an extra resistance or an extra immunity based on the creature that you had captured later on, you
Yeah.
know. And I didn't put a hard limit on in how much time this has to occur, but you could put an arbitrary time of like within the next week or whatever. But
Right. It could
it's
scale with weapon rarity too. This could be a whole set of weapons. I like this so much.
I'm glad you like it. I had a good. I feel like this was right out of the gate my like best idea, and then I didn't really want to do a bunch of things that were variations on the same sort of idea. I feel like this was the
Yeah.
best way for me to capture. Your DM has a hand in choosing when this happens. It's not game breaking either, right? This is one
Right.
time where a monster is a little bit stronger than it would be otherwise. If you've got a good party, if you're, the squads in formation and all of that stuff, that's going to create a more interesting, more complex combat, perhaps, but it's not going to be like the difference between a TPK and an easy encounter, right?
Right.
So
Yeah, this is great. I
yeah.
love that it scales with character level. That is a
Mhm.
really cool thing that does not show up in the game enough. That is very cool. I like that it can provide the party with insight into different creatures.
Mhm.
Because once you have it in your weapon, you obviously have to see the stat block. You have to know, or at least your GM provides you with the actions that are
Yeah, a list
available
of its
to you
actions, yeah.
to use. That's really cool. I mean, this would be so good for any type of ranger, any type of like
Yeah.
adventurous paladin, swashbuckler, rogue,
Yeah.
anything like that. Anything that can focus on, traversal and the gaining of information. This is awesome because the more things that you use this on, the more you have in your book to use for the future.
Well, yeah, I was definitely picturing Ranger vibes for this in general because another aspect of it is that if you're a player character or even just a player, depending on your DM's sort of okayness with the meta of it, you can use some of your knowledge about these creatures to know what would be an actual good creature for me to capture the essence of, you know.
Yeah.
If I'm fighting something I've never seen before, I might not know if it's worth grabbing. I've seen a couple of its actions, maybe, but I don't know what I would be able to invoke from this weapon. But the more you know about monsters, the more you can see like that. That's an ability that I want,
Right.
and then you scoop it.
Right.
Then you got to try and get your party members to let you get in the last hit so that you can make sure that you are the one who
Right.
gets that feature.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of things.
How do you maneuver that without being too above table either? Hey
Yeah.
guys, please hold off for just a second.
The second item here goes the opposite direction. So it gives you a penalty now in exchange for a boon later.
Okay.
This is heavily inspired by Chaos from Hades. So, for those of you who haven't played Hades, perhaps, this is a game where you go on all these runs and you're collecting boons from various gods and getting powered up to try and escape from hell. But one of the gods that you can encounter is Chaos, and his boons or their boons are special. They grant you boons that don't take effect for a few chambers. So you have to go through a few encounters first before the boon takes place. And in the meantime, you are hit with a penalty. So this is heavily inspired by that. These are called the Scales of Vergadane. Vergadane is, in the Forgotten Realms lore, a dwarven god of merchants. These would be sort of balance scales for deciding on a
Okay.
fair exchange rate. So this heavy brass balance scale is inscribed with dwarven runes and bears ornate pearlescent waiting pans. A creature in possession of the scales can use its action to speak the command word and commune with an otherworldly deific merchant. The merchant offers a deal determined by the DM or by rolling on the following tables. The creature can accept the chosen penalty for 1d4 days in order to attain the chosen boon for the following 1d4 days. Once the scales have been used in this way, they cannot be used again until 30 days have passed. So, the penalties and boons are almost just across the board straight one-to-one opposites of each other. So
Sure.
the penalties include you take an additional 1d4 force damage from all attacks and spells. You cannot upcast spells. Your ability checks cannot benefit from any proficiency or expertise you may have. You cannot take more than one attack when you use the attack action on your turn. Your weapons and spells deal half damage on your first turn in combat. You have vulnerability to the first instance of damage you take in each encounter. You heal half the rolled amount from potions, hit dice, and healing spells cast on you. And your rolls cannot be modified by advantage or disadvantage. So all of these would just like serve to be like for 1d4 days, so however many adventuring days that is. I considered making this encounters. That's a little bit tricky to track, but I feel like it might work.
Yeah. I think that could work because, I mean, that is kind of up to your table too, because there are a lot of tables that use, days of attrition where they have like 5 or 6 encounters in a day. That could be very interesting.
So maybe I could switch it to 1d4 encounters in order to attain the chosen boon for the following 1d4 days. I don't know. But the boons include you deal an additional 1d force damage with all weapon and spell attacks. You can cast spells of 5th level and lower as though you had cast them 1 level higher. You gain expertise in any skills in which you have proficiency. You can take 1 additional attack whenever you take the attack action on your turn. All other creatures deal half damage to you during the first round of combat. Your movement speed doubles. You heal an additional 1d8 HP from potions, hit dice, and healing spells cast on you. And when you have multiple instances of advantage or disadvantage, they stack rather than canceling as normal. Which, maybe I should just make that advantage because that sort of ruins the benefit part of it. But I don't know. These are rolled randomly too, so you can, as an example, I can get some dice out and I can just roll 2d8 real quick, and we'll say the penalty is you take an additional 1d4 force damage from all attacks and spells for the next 1d4 days. So you take a bunch of extra damage. But at the end of that, for 1d4 days, you gain expertise in any skill in which you have proficiency.
Is the 1d4 the same for the penalty and the boon, or do you?
That's a good question. I think I intended it to be rolled separately, but I think if I were to change it to encounters, I think I would have the penalty period be a shorter amount than the days that you had the boon for.
Yeah. So I'm just thinking about how disappointed I would be if I carried this penalty around for 4 days and got 1 day's worth of
well,
extra damage.
I think you could roll that also in the preparation. So we'll say 2 days of the penalty for 1 day of the benefit. That will change how you feel about it, right?
That's true.
That will change your decision to accept that or reject it. But I do think I kind of like the idea of having it be encounters instead, and for the boon to last for a certain number of days. Yeah. So the boon is sort of persistent, whereas the penalty is really only. Oh, but I'd have to change at least one of them, because there are lots of things here. Obviously, the 1d4 force damage from attacks and spells is only going to happen during combat encounters. But the idea that you can't upcast spells could be relevant outside of combat. Obviously, ability checks not benefiting from proficiency has a lot of use outside of combat.
Advantage and disadvantage can be huge.
Yeah, maybe 1d4 days of penalty for 1d4 plus 1 days of boon. I don't know.
There you go.
Some way to balance it a little bit in favor of the boon. Anyway, this is kind of the opposite of that.
This is very
cool.
Again,
all the stakes are there for you before you make the choice. You can decide to take this. The only caveat is that if you decide to reject, you can't activate it again for another 30 days. So if you don't get what you want, it's gone.
Right. No harm, no foul. Try again in a month.
Yeah. Try again in a month and see if you get something that is a little bit more appealing to you.
This is very cool. I can see this as an excellent end of quest line little bonus item.
Yeah, yeah.
It's really flavorful. It provides so much cool RP opportunity. I can see parties, maybe not lawful good parties, but more gray area parties fighting over this.
Yeah.
You wake up in the morning on the 31st day. You're like, who's going to use the scale? Like, it's my turn. You got it last time.
Yeah.
That's
I want it.
fantastic.
Yeah.
Really
So,
great job. Really great work, man.
appreciate it. Yeah, I like these. I think I like the scales as more of a quest item and the kind of
Yeah.
thing that most campaigns could like have is like the end of a quest line, and then maybe you use it once before going into the final like quest line to get the big boss to try and like
Yeah.
give yourself a little bit of this, but you have to struggle through all of the pre-encounters with this penalty first and all that. But yeah, I like it a lot. I like the weapon of binding quite a bit. I feel like that's the kind of thing that I could easily port over to games basically right away. I think it'd be a lot of fun.
That is a weapon I would immediately take. If I had an option to choose my own inventory, I would take that weapon.
Well, I'm excited to see the rule set that you came up with. Sounds like it's very different than what I was approaching this with.
Entirely different. Not
Great.
even in the same. I mean, it's still concerning items, but I did not make any items. So if you would also please open your document, Dan.
Indeed.
I present to you volatile items and consequences.
Okay.
As useful as magic is in the world of Dungeons and Dragons, the naked truth is that most forget just how dangerous it can be. Any magic, be it divine, primal, arcane, or otherwise, has the potential to warp the world in ways that a magic user might not understand or have the capacity to control. These uncontrollable outcomes can often be tempered by magical safeguards. A cleric may be protected by their deity, or a wizard can rely on decades of training and experience. But sometimes, however, mistakes can be made that are out of a user's control. And these mistakes can often happen during the creation and imbuement of the magical items themselves. Not every shop owner can be an arcane expert, and sometimes an item made of less than reputable materials can wind up on their shelves. When an item is constructed from a substance that cannot properly contain the magic within it, those substances are called volatile materials. And items crafted with volatile materials can be used as normal. However, anytime a creature with a volatile item in their inventory happens to roll a natural 1, they must make a con save against a DC determined by the item's rarity. A specific DC breakdown is provided in the volatile difficulty table below. Common with a difficulty class of 8, then moving up, uncommon, rare, very rare, legendary, and artifact, 11, 14, 17, 20, and 23 correspondingly. If a creature holding a volatile item fails its saving throw, they are required to roll a d20 and are subject to the consequence associated with the result, as can be seen on the volatile consequences table next to this. I also included an optional rule. If a player character wishes to craft an item themselves, they roll a d100. If the result is 5 or lower, they have created a volatile item.
There it is. There it is.
Yep.
Yes. Immediately when you started reading this, when I got to the second paragraph here, I was like, "Oh, I am adding this to every artificer or anybody who's trying to craft anything in my games. If you're trying to craft a poison, if you're trying to craft a potion, if you're trying to craft or add an effect to a magical item, boom, this is absolutely yes. Give me a random table to make this volatile. Great, I love it.
So my thoughts going into this, immediately as I was writing this, I was saying, well, there's a whole lot of consequence here, and not a lot of boon, right? I think maybe just like using the item is the benefit here. So I think in these cases, I was thinking that these would be just special quest items that would have this property, something that really lets players do something special. I don't know if I would put volatile materials inside of like a +1 longsword. That feels cheap. So it would, in my opinion, have to be something pretty fantastic or very unique for me to apply this. Unless it's crafting, then roll the d100, at your own leisure.
Right.
But we have a list of 20 consequences here. Some of them are similar to each other in increasing intensity. Some of them are unique, like the 1 and the 20. But for example, if you roll a natural 1 on your volatile consequence, your item explodes. It reduces you to 0 hit points, and it opens a 10-foot radius arcane rift on the ground, centered on you. Any creature in this area falls immediately and is trapped inside of a pocket demiplane until a creature outside of the demiplane casts a wish spell to remove them.
Holy cow. Yo, that's wild.
And I felt like these are consequences, so the natural 20 can't be like great, but it is a positive. On a natural 20, if the item has charges, it regains all of the charges. If it does not use charges, you have advantage on your next attack roll, saving throw, or skill check. So just a little bit of a boost if you roll for the volatile material, but then you score a natural 20. And then everything in between is kind of it kind of fluctuates on the gradient scale.
Sure.
It has things like the item crumbles to dust immediately, or crumbles to dust in 1d20 hours. So you know you have a finite amount of time with it. The item temporarily overheats, so you take 1d10 fire damage. Things like the item is rendered inert for a number of days or minutes, depending on what you roll. The item is ejected from your inventory, landing a number of feet away from you at the Game Master's choice, up to 40 feet or up to, I think, one of the worst rolls is up to 60 feet. One of the better rolls is kind of just at your feet on the ground.
Yeah.
If you roll a 17, no adverse effects take place. Nothing happens.
Cool.
And then 18, 19, and 20 are vaguely positive things. But 16 and below are something adverse, ranging from annoying to totally life-changing and detrimental.
Yeah, I just like this idea of volatile as like an item tag that, you know, based on the provenance of where they get it from, you know, you could have, I mean, like we were saying about my like snake oiler guy who's in one of my games, who made the arcane elixirs or the magical elixirs. His shop is probably full of, I'm gonna say like 25% items with the volatile tag would be my guess. So that you know, you might not, unless you make a certain check, you might not notice that it's volatile when you're buying it. But it just has this little like V tag that's like, what is that in your inventory? But you know, when magic happens or anything else like that, when a surge happens, you know, it has this potential to go awry. And again, for characters when they are crafting things, you know, perhaps if they're crafting things from less than ideal materials, you know, if they're trying to, you know, if they don't have all the things that they need, but they have 80% of it, and they're going to just try and like, you know, make these
we're just gonna go for it.
less perfect materials work, or if they just roll low or anything else like that, you know, you can give it that volatile tag and be like, it'll work for now. And just see how it goes
until it doesn't. It'll work until it just vanishes out of your hands.
That's a great little additional rule set for items, and specifically like enchanted and magically crafted items, which I think is really fun
in a modern world where there are 1,000 different options for buying things online, and you never know really where it's coming from or what you're going to get. You can buy from the mom and pop specialist store and spend a few more dollars, or you can go to Temu, and these are the items that you get from Temu.
Do you get the Alibaba of magic items?
Absolutely.
No, this is good.
Thank you, man.
Obviously, I appreciate the desire to sort of make all these things sort of negative, you know, 16 and below are just like definitely bad. 18, 19, 20, you're like mostly good.
You're fine.
I could see this even being like a larger table. I don't know. 1D100 is crazy big. That's probably too much for me to ask.
I really did not want to go up to the next increment.
No, D100 is too big for you to do in a week. But I do think it could function. More like a wild magic table where it's not necessarily all bad or all even in the same vein of bad. And there's maybe a little bit more of like a 60-40 split from bad to good, and like some of the
Right.
bad is also like, it's weird status effects that are like strange and
I
don't.
thought about that too, and those are the things that can pop up on a D100 though, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like where you go from percentile 40 to percentile 70. All of those are just like innocuous, that like you grow a tail for a week,
Yeah.
or you can't taste salt or something like that, where it
That's a good
really
one.
doesn't make
Honestly,
any
if that's not on
difference
the
to
list, it should
you.
be.
Yeah. You have no food seasoning for the next month. On a 50, on an even 50, no
Yep.
salt. I thought about making it a D40 table and just starting at
Mm-hmm.
2.
Two
But I
D20.
really wanted I really wanted the Nat 1 in there. So
Yeah, and I think that's good.
yeah. Yeah.
Uh, yeah, I think all told, I think this is a really fun framework for adding that aspect to created items.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's and it has that vibe of like, there's a little risk, there's a little penalty involved in maybe not checking your magic items quite so well. But you got a
Right.
magic item and it might stick around.
Right. You have a 1 in 20 chance for another 1 in 20 chance for something bad to happen.
Well, that's fun. I like it.
Thanks, man. Yeah, I don't know. I had some weapon ideas, and I just threw those out because I don't know. I don't know why I felt so weird about this prompt this week. I just really wanted to do it in a way that seemed fair to everybody.
Sure. Yeah, and I think that's a reasonable approach, and I think that anything that does really hinder a character's ability to function is
Yeah.
going to be kind of too much and going to feel antagonistic and going to feel like it's sucking the fun out. And I think that even my like scales, I'm presenting the option to not choose the thing, but obviously like I didn't want to make any of the penalty options feel like it was making your character completely useless.
Right.
Hopefully, mostly what they do is make you feel like you either have to be a little bit more cautious or you're not as reliable for the skills that you were really reliable for. And so you have to like find more creative ways around that for a short time.
Right.
That is hopefully what it manifests as. But I definitely see yours too as like, resisting that desire to go too far into something that's going to really, really harsh an experience from a player perspective without that communication up front.
Right. I think items like these can be very fun story beats for players that like to be more chaotic, that kind of welcome that with open arms, and that's all on the players. That's the player's prerogative. More often than not, I am looking out for the players that prefer not to play that way, or that are new players, especially new players that are playing with experienced DMs, that are used to playing with experienced players. I have fallen into that trap before myself. I don't want to put anybody else in that situation, or at least mitigate that as much as possible.
Yeah.
So here we are.
Yeah. I don't really play with items that can have those really crazy sweeping effects, because those do feel like they are it feels like they ride the line of like really souring the experience for at least somebody at the table. I think of like I think it's still in the rules, but it's like it's some kind of like powder or dust that like changes your gender forever, and it's just like that's weird. And also half the things in the deck of many things are like, okay, the deck of many things is fun in concept, but also like so many of those things are like, oh, we're just gonna undo any sense of plot that is going into the campaign because something has taken precedence, because we have a friend who's been shunted into the astral plane.
Right.
Like so many things in that deck are just like, this will ruin everyone's life. And like, if you have anybody at your table who's like, I want to focus on the plot, I want to pay attention to like what's the story that we're building together, and doesn't want to follow the next thing, the deck of many things is not going to be fun for those people. it's going to be a burden.
Yes. I actually just recently gave my players a deck of many things, and I made sure that I gave it to a player that has time and time again proven that they are not only skilled as a player mechanically, but also is very conscious about playing their character as their character would play in the most positive way you can say that. There have been many circumstances since they've gotten the deck that they very easily could have pulled a card or 2 cards or 5 cards, and they're like, "No, it doesn't make sense here. This is going to be like last stand material."
Yeah.
And that's very cool. And I would not have provided that item to them if I didn't think that was going to be the case. And I think that's kind of how these items are going to be used too.
Again, it all comes down to table trust and table communication, and like what rapport you've already built up and what the style of game you like to play has already become. So communication, so key. Well, Michael, would you like to do the honors of rolling for what we're going to make next week?
I would love to. It looks like today we're going with a 12.
A 12 from Grace on the Discord. We're going to be building something called the Tax Collector.
Is that verbatim what it is? Something called the Tax Collector?
Something called the Tax Collector.
Okay.
It's just something. It's not determined what it is. Spell, item, monster, subclass.
The most open thing we've ever made. Maybe we'll ever make. That's the most open prompt on the whole list, I think.
I have to decide if I'm going to try and gamble on how many things you're going to come with and try and come with one more.
It could be a lot. Just saying right now, foresight into the future, probably a lot of stuff.
There are a lot of options here. So many. Here. How many things could I make?
Like, do you go from a literal standpoint and make it a monster, like make it a humanoid monster that collects taxes?
Yeah, just a human guy who comes around. He's an NPC. He comes to collect your taxes.
Yeah, just once a year, just 3 gold apiece. That's all you need. All right, see you next year, folks.
Tax collector could be a monster inspired by WWE and be like a wrestler. I'm the tax collector.
Yeah. Oh, it's a perfect wrestler. It's a perfect.
I've come to collect, brother.
Yeah. Time to pay what's due.
Could easily be a subclass of a couple different things. I can see it being a roguish subclass.
Yeah. It could be a weapon that takes things from your enemies. It could be an item that takes things from you.
Ooh.
Dang.
Yeah. Lots of options. Could be a spell.
Could be a spell.
Could be a spell in the spirit of Acquisitions Incorporated.
Yeah, you could. It's a spell that just summons the tax collector NPC from before.
Yeah. Just it's time. It's time to collect the taxes. You
He's
must cast
there.
this spell once per quarter.
9th level spell. We need as much magic from you as possible. Just cast your 9th level spell into this well.
That's another question. What's the tax that it's collecting? Is it collecting money, or is it like?
Oh, absolutely!
You got to pay the spell slot tax. Or you got to pay the HP tax.
The wizards of the monarchy are lacking in power these days, so everybody has to pay their arcane tax once a year.
My goodness!
Are we writing a one shot right now? Are you and I about to co-DM this one shot? But the arcane tax collectors? This
wild.
Is a fantastic prompt.
Wild.
I'm
so
excited
good. About this. This is wild. Thank you, Grace. This is huge.
Yes.
Well, Michael, I feel like it's worth me asking if you have anything to say to the people before we say goodbye. Although we already gave them so much good advice, I think, about talking with their table. But do you have anything to say to the people before we say goodbye?
Dan, I always have something to say to the people before we say goodbye.
Should have known.
I mean, we're 16 episodes in at this point. I've only failed you twice and asked you to take this job from me. This is actually going to be a really short one. For anybody that wants to craft something, especially if you're a DM, especially if you're just getting into running games, there is no idea that is too small. for your game. If you think that something will benefit you or benefit your players, it doesn't matter if it's just a tiny switch up of the rules. If you think that it's good, go ahead and implement it. And if it doesn't work, that's fine. But if you think that something is too basic or too small or too insignificant and you don't try it, you're just doing a disservice to yourself and to your table.
Hey, great tip, and one used by every DM who has ever homebrewed brass knuckles to give the +1 magical bonus or +2 magical bonus to your monks. Yeah. I see you. I'm right there with you. All right, Michael. Well, it's been a pleasure.
Yes.
Great talking to you, as always.
As always.
And everyone, we will talk to you again next time. Goodbye.
Goodbye. Hey everyone, it's Michael. Thanks for listening to this episode of the College of Creation. If you want to see our creations from this episode and our past episodes, you can find those for free on our Patreon page. That's patreon.com/College of Creation Pod. And if you decide to become a patron, you'll also automatically get access to any revised versions of the things we've created, plus our patron Discord, and bonus chats with Dan and myself. You can send any of your own homebrew prompts or questions to collegeofcreationpod@gmail.com, and our music is by Fuserwolf. You can check out his tunes on Bandcamp and Spotify. As always, thank you so much for listening.